I've always believed that nothing good comes after midnight. By 60 years old, you learn that the phone only rings late for bad news, that knocks on the door rarely mean kindness. Still, when the sound of someone pounding against my front door split through the quiet of my old house, I froze. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. It was just after 12. The neighborhood was hushed under a blanket of fog, the kind of stillness where even the crickets hold their breath. I pulled my robe tighter and walked down the hallway, each step on the wooden floorboards creaking louder than it should. Another knock, heavier, impatient this time. My hand trembled as I reached for the chain lock. "Who is it?" I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "Mom, it's me." The voice hit me like a wave I hadn't expected. My son, Caleb. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Not since the arguments, the distance, the cold silences that grew like weeds between us. I pressed my palm against the door as though to steady myself. "Caleb?" My voice cracked on his name. "Yeah, Mom." "Please open up. It's late and Marissa's with me." Marissa, my daughter-in-law. Elegant, careful with her words, always wearing that smile that never quite reached her eyes. Why were they here now, in the middle of the night? I unlatched the chain slowly, opened the door just enough for the porch light to catch their faces. Caleb stood tall, coat zipped up, his eyes strangely bright. Marissa lingered behind him, her lips curved into a soft smile, her arms crossed as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Can we come in?" Caleb asked, his tone smooth but urgent. "It's freezing out here." Something inside me hesitated, but I stepped aside. The warmth of the house swallowed them, though the air seemed heavier once they entered. Caleb kissed my cheek quickly, almost formally. Marissa brushed past with a faint perfume trailing her, the kind of scent too sweet to be sincere. "It's been a long time," I said, my voice steadying though my chest still pounded. "What's going on?" Caleb smiled, but not the smile I remembered from when he was a boy. This one was practiced, almost rehearsed. "We just wanted to see you. To talk." "It's been too long." Marissa placed a hand on his arm, her manicured nails catching the light. "We thought, maybe tonight, you'd let us sit with you." "As a family." Her words sounded warm, but there was something behind them, a weight I couldn't quite name. I led them into the living room, where the old grandfather clock ticked like it was counting down. They sat side by side on the couch, too close, too composed. I stayed in the armchair opposite, the worn fabric holding me like an anchor. For a moment, no one spoke. Caleb looked around the room, his eyes brushing over the photos on the mantel. Jonathan and me on our wedding day, baby pictures of Caleb and his brother, old Christmas mornings. His jaw tightened for just a second before he caught himself. "It hasn't been easy for us lately," he began, his voice low, deliberate. "Work's been rough. The business isn't what it used to be." I folded my hands in my lap, waiting. "We've been talking," Marissa said smoothly, her eyes locking on mine. "And we think it's time to make sure you're taken care of. You're living in this big house all by yourself. It must be lonely, overwhelming." I forced a small laugh, though unease crawled up my spine. "I've been managing just fine." Marissa tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Of course. But wouldn't it be easier if someone you trusted handled things for you? Your finances, your future? That way you can just rest." Her words slid across the room like cold air. Caleb leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Mum, we're family. We should look out for each other." I studied his face, the same boy I once held against my chest when storms frightened him. But the man sitting here now, there was something else in his eyes, something calculating. The grandfather clock chimed once, breaking the silence, and in that single note I knew this midnight visit wasn't about love or family or care. It was about something else entirely. When Caleb and Marissa settled into my living room, the air grew taut, like a string stretched too tightly. I sat across from them in my old armchair, its fabric worn soft by years of use, clutching the edge of the armrest to still the tremor in my hands. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung steadily, but time felt wrong. Too slow. Too heavy. "Mom?" Caleb began, his voice carrying a softness that rang false. "It doesn't feel right that we've been apart for so long. We should be closer. Family should take care of each other." His words might have comforted me years ago, but tonight they sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, while Marissa smoothed the skirt of her dress, her eyes locked on mine with polite intensity. "I've been doing fine," I answered, my voice firmer than I felt. "I've got my routine. My neighbors check in. I don't need anyone worrying about me." Marissa tilted her head, her smile too sweet. "Oh, Evelyn, it isn't about worry. It's about making sure you don't carry burdens alone. Imagine how much lighter life would feel if Caleb handled your financial matters. You could rest, travel, enjoy your time. Rest." The word slid from her lips with an edge that unsettled me. "I don't need anyone managing my life," I said flatly. For a moment, Caleb's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something sharper. Irritation, maybe, anger, before he quickly softened his expression again. "Mum, please don't be stubborn. You're 60 now. Dad would have wanted us to look after you, Jonathan." The mention of my late husband's name hit like a blow. I pictured him in his workshop, sawdust clinging to his hair, the way he laughed when I teased him about working too hard. He had been gone nearly 10 years, but his absence still ached. "Don't use your father to make a point," I whispered. Caleb shifted, his smile faltering. Marissa filled the silence, her tone smooth as cream. "We're not here to argue. We're here because we love you. But love also means being practical. Houses this size, savings accounts. They require responsibility. Don't you think it's wiser to let family, the people who care most, step in?" Her eyes flicked briefly toward Caleb, as if reminding him to stay calm. I caught it. The small signal told me she was the one steering this conversation, the one holding the strings. I rose from my chair, needing space. At the mantel, I straightened a photo of Jonathan holding Caleb as a toddler. The contrast between the child in the picture and the man sitting across the room nearly broke me. Turning back, I asked, "Why now?" After a year of silence, after months of not returning calls, why come to my door at midnight with all this talk of responsibility and burdens? Caleb hesitated. Marissa didn't. Because the world is unpredictable. Things happen. We all need security. Her words were careful, but the tone, deliberate, edged, sent a chill crawling up my spine. "I'm not selling my home," I said. "I'm not signing over anything. If you came here for that, you've wasted your time." The room stilled. For a breath, I thought Caleb might lash out. His hands clenched, then relaxed, his smile returning too quickly. "No one's forcing you. We're just talking." but his eyes betrayed him. The warmth was gone. What stared back at me was calculation, cold and patient. I realized then this visit wasn't about reunion. It wasn't about care. It was a trap. And I was sitting in the center of it. The clock struck 1. Its heavy chime rattled the silence that had settled after my refusal. Caleb leaned back into the couch, his eyes darting toward Marissa as though waiting for her to recalibrate their strategy. She gave him a small nod, subtle, but I caught it. I'd spent my life watching children in a library, learning to recognize when someone was fibbing about late book returns or hiding a candy wrapper between the pages. Lies always left breadcrumbs. My son thought he could hide his intentions behind charm, but the little things gave him away. "Mum," Caleb said finally, his voice syrupy smooth. "We've been doing well. The business is thriving. We've even been talking about taking a trip overseas next year. Paris, maybe. It'll be good for us." Marissa's smile tightened. "Yes," she added quickly. "We've been saving for it for months." But there it was. The first crack. 2 months earlier, a letter from the bank had arrived mistakenly at my address. Caleb's name on the envelope. I'd almost forwarded it to him unopened, but something about the urgent red print made me look. Overdue. Fees stacking. A warning of collection. I had tucked the letter away in my desk, unsure of whether to confront him. Now, hearing them speak of saving for trips, I felt my stomach knot. "Oh?" I asked, steadying my tone. "Overseas travel? That's expensive. How do you afford that with the business struggling?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Caleb blinked, his jaw tightening. Marissa's hand shot to his arm, squeezing it gently, a reminder to keep the mask on. "The business isn't struggling," he said firmly, too quickly. "Who told you that?" I kept my face neutral, hiding the memory of the letter. "Just thought I heard something." Must have been mistaken. Marissa leaned forward, her smile sharpened. "People love to gossip, Evelyn. You shouldn't listen to whispers. Caleb works hard. He provides." But even as she spoke, her eyes flickered toward him with the faintest flash of irritation, as though he'd already botched the performance. I stood, crossing to the kitchen under the pretense of making tea. My hands trembled slightly as I filled the kettle, the whistle echoing too loudly in the silence. From the corner of the doorway, I heard them whispering. "Why did you say that?" Marissa hissed. "She's suspicious already." "What difference does it make?" Caleb's voice was low, tense. "Difference. If she thinks we're hiding things, she'll never agree." I froze. The kettle clutched in my hands. Their voices weren't loud, but in the stillness of the house, they carried. I returned with the tray, forcing my expression into one of calm hospitality. I placed the cups before them, steam rising between us like a veil. "So, tell me," I said gently, "why come tonight, at midnight of all times?" Marissa didn't hesitate. "Because we were nearby, visiting friends, and thought, why not surprise you?" The lie was almost elegant, but I knew. Caleb never had friends in this part of town. He'd cut ties years ago. "Friends?" I asked casually, sipping my tea. "Yes," she said, her smile unwavering. "Old friends." "You wouldn't know them." Caleb's eyes narrowed, as though willing me not to probe further. The kettle's warmth seeped into my palms as I cradled my cup, but inside, a chill settled deep. They weren't here for a reunion. They weren't here for family. They were circling me, like wolves testing the edges of a fence. And now, with each slip of the tongue, I was beginning to see the shape of the trap. I've always believed that memory chooses its moments, surfacing not when you want it to, but when you least expect it. That night, sitting across from Caleb and Marissa as they spun their half-truths in my living room, the past began tugging at me like a thread unraveling from an old sweater. Jonathan's face came back to me. The lines around his eyes deepened by years of laughter and work. His voice, steady and warm, echoing in our kitchen as he read the morning paper. And then, the way I found him one evening, collapsed in his workshop, sawdust clinging to his shirt, his body already cold. The doctors had called it a heart attack. But even then, a question had lived in me. Why did it feel so sudden, so unfinished? "Mum," Caleb said suddenly, pulling me back into the room. "You've kept this house exactly the same since Dad passed. Don't you think it's time to move forward? To let go of the past?" His words struck deeper than he realized. Let go of the past. He said it like a command, not a suggestion. Marissa chimed in, her tone velvety smooth. "We could help you with that. Sell the house, put everything in order. You'd be free, Evelyn. Doesn't that sound peaceful?" Peaceful. I glanced at Jonathan's photo on the mantel. He'd built this house with his own 2 hands, carved shelves, laid floors, poured his sweat into every corner. To sell it now would be to erase him. "No," I said firmly. "This house is my life. Your father's memory is here. I won't trade it for peace." Caleb's jaw twitched, his hands tightening on his knees. "Dad wouldn't want you stuck here." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. It wasn't grief. It was dismissal, like Jonathan's life had been nothing but a hurdle to move past. I studied him, really studied him. The curve of his mouth, the hard glint in his eyes. And for the first time I wondered, what did Caleb know about his father's death that I didn't? Because as I replayed those final days, little details I had brushed aside began to surface. The arguments Jonathan and Caleb had behind closed doors, the hushed tones when money was mentioned, the way Jonathan's shoulders sagged heavier each evening, carrying a burden he never explained. Back then, I thought it was just the stress of running his small contracting business. But what if it wasn't? "Mom?" Caleb's voice snapped me back. He was watching me closely, his gaze sharp, like he was measuring whether I believed him or not. "I was just thinking about your father," I said softly. Marissa leaned forward, her smile thin. "Jonathan was a good man, but he's gone now. Don't torture yourself with old ghosts. What matters is the future. Your future." Their words pressed at me from both sides, heavy, insistent. But Jonathan's ghost wasn't a burden. It was a warning. I sipped my tea, my hands steady though my insides shook. "Your father used to say something," I murmured. "The truth always waits. You can bury it under lies, but it never rots." Caleb's eyes flickered. Just for a second. A twitch, a shift, the smallest ripple of unease. But I caught it. And in that fleeting crack, I knew my late husband's death, sudden, unexplained, wasn't buried as deep as they wanted me to believe. I hadn't noticed at first. Maybe because I didn't want to. Or maybe because, after years of living alone, the simple act of having voices in the house again tricked me into thinking I was safe. But as the night stretched on, the truth became clear. I was no longer the host in my own home. Caleb and Marissa had taken root, their presence growing heavier by the minute. The warmth of reunion that should have come with their visit never bloomed. Instead, it curdled into something else. Control. Around 2 a.m, I rose quietly, intending to slip into the kitchen for water. My hand reached for the phone on the wall, the old landline I'd kept even after everyone else switched to cell phones. But when I lifted the receiver, The line was dead. No dial tone. A cold weight pressed into my stomach. I turned to see Caleb leaning in the doorway, arms folded. "Phones are unreliable at night," he said smoothly, as though it were the most natural thing. "Storm knocked the line, probably. Don't worry about it." But there hadn't been a storm in weeks. When I went to lock the front door behind me, something I always did, even when home alone, I found the deadbolt already turned. Secure, too secure. Caleb had the keys in his pocket. I knew because I'd seen him slip them there earlier with a casualness that made my skin crawl. "Mum," he said, voice calm, almost tender. "You shouldn't be up wondering. Sit. Rest. We'll take care of things." I did as he asked, not out of trust, but because resistance at that moment would have shown my fear. I returned to the armchair, forcing my face into a mask of calm. But inside, every instinct screamed, "They've cut me off." Marissa brought in another pot of tea. Her smile was steady, her movements precise, like a hostess who had already claimed the house as hers. She poured Caleb's cup first, then mine, finally her own. When she slid the cup toward me, I hesitated. "Drink," she urged gently. "It'll help you sleep." The way she said it tightened something in my chest. I left the tea untouched. The hours stretched. At some point, Marissa rose and began straightening the magazines on my coffee table, rearranging the books on the shelf. Small things, but each gesture screamed ownership. Caleb walked the perimeter of the living room, running his hand along the mantel where Jonathan's photo sat. He picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then set it down with a faint smirk. "You know," he said, his tone almost playful, "this house has good bones. With some work, it could sell for a fortune." I forced my voice steady. "This house isn't for sale." He didn't argue. He only smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a son respecting his mother's wishes. It was the smile of a man who already believed the house was his. By dawn, exhaustion pulled at my body, but I dared not close my eyes. Every sound, the click of Marissa's nails against her teacup, the steady pacing of Caleb's steps, kept me alert. When sunlight finally crept through the blinds, Marissa drew them shut. "Too bright," she murmured. Then she turned to me, her eyes glinting. "Why don't you rest, Evelyn?" "You need strength." "Strength for what?" I shook my head. "I'll rest when I want to." The air grew taut. Caleb's smile flickered. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time since they'd arrived, neither of them bothered to hide the truth. I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I wasn't family. I was an obstacle. And now, in my own home, I was a prisoner. By evening, the house no longer felt like mine. Caleb and Marissa moved through the rooms with a quiet authority, as though they'd lived here all along. Marissa hummed while setting the table, pulling my dishes from the cabinet as though it were her own kitchen. Caleb lit the dining room lamp, casting a golden glow that should have been comforting, but instead sharpened every shadow. I sat in my usual chair, the head of the table Jonathan had carved decades ago. But instead of presiding over a family meal, I felt like a guest at a gathering I hadn't agreed to host. Marissa carried in a pot of stew, her movements elegant, controlled. She ladled steaming portions into bowls, her smile fixed, her voice warm but clipped. "You've worked too hard today, Evelyn. Let us take care of you. That's what family does." "Family?" The word sounded foreign in her mouth. Caleb raised his glass of water. "To us." "To a new chapter, I didn't raise mine." "A new chapter of what?" His smile didn't waver. "Of family unity. of making sure you're not burdened anymore. I picked up my spoon, my stomach too knotted to eat. I stirred instead, watching the broth swirl, thinking of how Jonathan used to sit in that same chair Caleb now occupied, steady, trustworthy. My late husband's silence in the room was deafening. Marissa leaned forward, her elbows grazing the polished wood. "Evelyn, have you thought about what we said? About simplifying things? This house is too big, too heavy. You deserve ease." "I've already told you," I said, my voice firm. "This house isn't leaving my hands." The smile on her lips faltered, though her tone remained sweet. "But think of how much you could enjoy life without the stress. We could find you something smaller, cozy, safe." "Safe?" I asked. The word hung between us, heavier than the stew. "Safe from what?" Caleb's eyes flickered toward her, then back to me. "Safe from accidents, from life's unpredictability." The spoon stilled in my hand. My gaze snapped to his, and for a heartbeat, neither of us blinked. His words hadn't been clumsy, they'd been deliberate. "You sound like you're planning something," I said softly. Marissa's laugh was quick, too quick. "Oh, Evelyn, don't be dramatic. He just means you're not as young as you once were. A fall, a slip down the stairs, anything could happen. Isn't it better to have us watching over things?" Their words twisted together like threads in a noose. I set the spoon down carefully, afraid my shaking hand would give me away. "I've managed my life just fine," I said, "and I don't need anyone watching over me." The air shifted. Caleb's smile thinned into something brittle. Marissa folded her hands neatly, her eyes glinting. The mask of tenderness was still there, but underneath it, I saw calculation and impatience. We ate in silence after that, the scrape of spoons against bowls the only sound. Every bite felt forced, every swallow difficult, as though the food itself carried unspoken threats. When the meal ended, Marissa collected the dishes, humming again, though the melody was hollow. Caleb stayed at the table, his fingers tapping against the wood. "You know, Mum," he said finally, "Dad used to talk about responsibility, about how we'd have to step up one day. Maybe that day's come sooner than you think." I held his gaze, my pulse drumming. "Jonathan would never have wanted you to threaten me in his name." His eyes narrowed, the veneer slipping. For just a second, I saw it clearly, the cold hunger that had driven him here. Marissa returned, setting her hand gently on his shoulder. "Patience," she whispered, though she didn't mean for me not to hear. Patience. For what? For when? The table between us suddenly felt less like a place of family meals and more like a battlefield. I realized then that this wasn't about persuasion anymore. It was about time. They were waiting for the right moment, the right excuse, to tighten the cage around me. And I knew, if I didn't find a way to turn their patience against them, I would lose more than my house. I would lose my life. The night after the uneasy dinner, I lay awake listening to the sounds of my own house being lived in by people who didn't belong. Footsteps in the hallway. The faint click of doors opening that I hadn't given them permission to enter. The creak of the floorboards in Jonathan's old study. My son and his wife weren't guests anymore. They were settlers, planting themselves, expanding into every corner, claiming what was never theirs. At dawn, I rose silently, slipping into the kitchen for coffee. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My heart steadied with the ritual. Grind, brew, pour. But just as I reached for my mug, a faint draught brushed my ankles. The study door was ajar, Jonathan's study, a place Caleb had never respected. I padded down the hallway, pushing the door open with care, fingers. Dust motes spun in the early light. Jonathan's desk sat just as he'd left it years ago. Solid oak, drawers heavy with memory. The top looked undisturbed, but one drawer, the bottom one, gaped slightly open. I knelt, pulling it out. Inside, beneath a stack of old invoices, was a thin black book I didn't recognize. The leather cover was cracked, the pages lined with Jonathan's neat handwriting at first. Then Caleb's sloppier scrawl overtaking it years later. My throat tightened as I turned the pages. Jonathan's entries were simple. Lists of household expenses, payments for supplies, small notes about savings. He'd been meticulous, careful. Then, abruptly, the handwriting changed. Caleb's? Withdrawals, repeated, irregular, in amounts that grew bolder over time. Notations in the margins, covered, borrowed, invest later. Lies dressed up as bookkeeping. And then came names I didn't recognize. Businesses, banks, private loans, scribbled numbers in the thousands. Crossed out, rewritten, added again. Debt. So much debt. My fingers trembled as I reached the last page. A single entry. Bold. Rushed. Owe $74,000. Find solution soon. Before she notices me. The room swayed around me. My son had been bleeding us dry long before Jonathan died. He hadn't just inherited problems. He had created them. And now, with Jonathan gone, I was his only remaining solution. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I slammed the ledger shut, shoving it back under the invoices just as Caleb's voice came from the doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his smile tight, his eyes flicking toward the desk. I forced my voice calm. "Just remembering your father." He stepped inside, hands sliding into his pockets, gaze roaming over the study like he was measuring its worth. He kept too many things. Old papers? Old books? Sometimes I think he liked clutter more than clarity. I held his stare. "Your father valued records. He believed truth belonged on paper." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Maybe fear? But it passed quickly. He smiled again, softer this time. "Truth," he echoed. "Funny thing, truth. Depends on who's telling it." The way he said it made my stomach twist. I brushed past him, the smell of his cologne sharp in the small room. I carried my coffee back into the kitchen, my heart pounding. Behind me, I heard him close the study door with a quiet, deliberate click. The ledger remained in the drawer. For now. But I knew then that my suspicions weren't just paranoia. They were proof. My son wasn't here out of love. He was here because lies, debts, and desperation had finally brought him home. And he wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted. Or until I stopped him. That night, the house was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against the walls, filling every corner. Caleb and Marissa had claimed the guest room, but I didn't believe for a moment that they were asleep. Their whispers had drifted through the hallway earlier, sharp and hurried, like blades scraping together. I lay awake in my bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling. Jonathan's face hovered in my thoughts, his smile, his steady hands, the way he used to lean against the doorway after dinner just to watch me wash dishes. I had lived 10 years believing his heart had given out, but the unease I'd carried all this time now grew louder, demanding to be heard. I rose quietly, slipping my robe around me, bare feet careful on the cool wood floor. The hallway stretched long and dim. The guest room door cracked just slightly. Voices spilled out, low but urgent. "She's suspicious," Marissa whispered, her tone edged with frustration. "She's always been suspicious." Caleb muttered. His voice carried that clipped impatience I remembered from when he was a boy caught in a lie. But it doesn't matter. She has no proof, Marissa hissed. She found something, Caleb. I saw her in the study. If she saw the ledger, then she knows what she shouldn't. He cut in. My breath caught, and I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering so hard I feared they'd hear it. There was a pause. Then Marissa spoke again, softer, deadlier. What about your father? She still clings to him, to his memory. If she ever pieces it together? Caleb's voice dropped, almost a growl. She won't. She can't. A pause, then words that turned my blood to ice. He was going to ruin everything. The money, the accounts. He knew. I warned him to stay out of it, but he wouldn't listen. So, I made sure he couldn't interfere again. My knees nearly gave way beneath me. Jonathan. My Jonathan. His death hadn't been sudden. It hadn't been fate. It had been Caleb. Marissa's voice came next, smooth and deliberate. And you never told her? Of course not, Caleb snapped. You think she'd look at me the same way if she knew I watched him fall? If she knew I let it happen. Fall. The word echoed in my skull. Jonathan had been found on the floor of his workshop, but now the image shifted, darker, a push, a struggle, something far worse than a failing heart. Marissa exhaled slowly. Then she can never know. She won't, Caleb said, his tone sharp with finality. By the time this is over, everything will be ours, and she'll be nothing but a memory. The words carved into me like glass. I clutched the wall, fighting the urge to scream, to burst into the room and claw the truth from his mouth. But I stayed silent, because I understood something crucial in that moment. Caleb didn't just want my house or my savings. He wanted to erase me, the way he had erased Jonathan. I crept back to my bedroom, each step slow, careful. When I shut the door, I pressed my back against it, trembling from head to toe. For years, I had mourned a husband I believed was stolen by nature. Now I knew he had been stolen by my own son, and unless I acted carefully, I would be next. Morning broke grey and heavy, the kind of light that dulls everything it touches. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the rising steam, but tasting nothing. The words I'd overheard last night still echoed in my skull. Caleb's voice admitting Jonathan hadn't died by fate, but by his hand. I should have felt broken. Instead, something colder had settled in me. Resolve. The scrape of footsteps drew my eyes up. Caleb entered the kitchen, his hair mussed, his smile too sharp for the hour. Marissa followed, her presence silent but commanding, like a shadow that never leaves your side. "Morning, Mum," Caleb said easily, as if we were any family gathered for breakfast. "Sleep well?" I forced my voice level. "Fine." He poured himself coffee, sat across from me, and laced his fingers together on the table. His gaze was steady, almost calm, but behind it, I saw the storm building. "Mum," he began, "it's time to stop dancing around this. We need clarity, for everyone's sake." Marissa slid into the chair beside him, her eyes locked on mine, her smile polite, but her silence louder than any words. Caleb leaned forward. "The house, the savings, the accounts. We need your signature." Now I set my mug down carefully, hiding the tremor in my hands. "And if I don't?" His smile thinned. "Then you're being selfish. And reckless. You're risking everything Dad built." At the mention of Jonathan, heat surged in my chest. I kept my expression calm, though inside the truth screamed. "Your father trusted me to protect this house, not to hand it away. Caleb's eyes hardened, the mask slipping. Don't twist this. He would have wanted security. And right now, I'm the only one who can provide it. Marissa's hand rested lightly on his arm, but her gaze pierced mine. Evelyn, no one lives forever. Better to plan now, while you still can. The words struck like a blade. Not if I live forever, while I still can. I stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. This house is not yours. Not now, not ever. And my life is mine to live, not yours to decide. Caleb rose too, his body tense, towering over the table. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Silence wrapped around us, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded, but I refused to step back. For a long moment, it was just the two of us locked in a stare. Mother and son, predator and prey. Finally, Caleb exhaled, forcing his smile back into place. Think about it, he said lightly. We'll give you until tonight? Marissa stood beside him, her voice smooth, final. But don't mistake patience for weakness. We always get what we need. They left the kitchen, their footsteps echoing through the hallway. I sank back into my chair, my chest trembling. The ultimatum had been spoken, the mask discarded. And I knew now that refusing them didn't just mean keeping my home. It meant fighting for my life. The hours after Caleb's ultimatum passed like years. I wandered the house pretending to tidy, but every step I took was measured, every glance calculated. Caleb and Marissa thought I was beaten down, that I was too old, too frail to resist. They were wrong. I had survived Jonathan's death. I had survived years of loneliness. I had survived the truth spilling out in whispers through the crack of a door. And now, I would survive this. I told myself that over and over as I studied the walls of my own home, looking not at the photographs and memories, but at exits, at possibilities. The landline was dead. I'd already discovered that. My cell phone had vanished sometime after their arrival. I didn't need to ask who had taken it. The front and back doors were both locked, the keys jingling in Caleb's pocket whenever he shifted. But there were still windows. After lunch, Caleb stretched on the couch, flipping through channels without interest. Marissa sat nearby, scrolling her phone, her eyes darting up every so often as if she were cataloguing my movements. I forced a yawn, rubbed my temples, and said, I'm going to lie down. Good idea, Marissa said, without looking up. Rest is important at your age. I climbed the stairs slowly, forcing my legs to move heavy, sluggish. But once out of sight, I quickened, my bare feet barely touching the carpet. In my bedroom, I eased the window open, the old wood groaning softly. Beyond it stretched the side yard, shadowed by the tall oak Jonathan had planted the year Caleb was born. The ground was uneven, the drop a good 6 feet. My knees ached just looking at it. But it was freedom. I swung one leg over the sill, my breath catching. And then, footsteps on the stairs. I froze, half in, half out, as Caleb's voice drifted upward. Mum? You awake? Heart pounding, I slipped back inside, shutting the window with a quiet thud, just as he appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Going somewhere? I forced a tired smile. Just airing out the room. It gets stuffy. His gaze lingered on me too long, searching for cracks. Then he smirked. Careful you don't fall. Wouldn't want an accident. The word accident hung between us like a blade. When he finally left, I sank onto the bed, my body trembling. My attempt had failed. But I'd learned something important. Caleb didn't trust me anymore. Every move I made, he was watching. I needed a new plan. Not an escape this time, but a way to trap them in their own lies. Because if I couldn't get out, then I'd make sure when help finally came, the truth would already be waiting. The house felt different after my failed attempt. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier, as though the very wood had absorbed my fear. Caleb and Marissa no longer pretended this was a visit. They moved with sharper edges now, less charm, more command. By evening, the storm broke. It began with dinner. Marissa placed a plate before me, roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, a meal that should have been comforting. Instead, it smelled of control, of finality. "Eat," she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. I pushed the food around with my fork, my stomach too knotted to swallow. Caleb sat across from me, watching. His patience had thinned to nothing, his smile gone. "Mum," he said, voice low, "enough games? We gave you time. Now we need your answer." I met his gaze, steady despite the pounding of my heart. "My answer hasn't changed." His fist slammed onto the table, rattling the dishes. Marissa didn't flinch. She only leaned back, her eyes glinting with satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for this. "You're being stubborn," Caleb snapped. "You'd rather die in this house than let us protect what's ours?" I rose slowly, my hands trembling but my voice calm. "This house isn't yours." "It never was." He shot to his feet, towering over me. "You think you can stop me? After everything? After Dad?" He bit the word off, too late. Marissa's hand closed around his arm, but she didn't silence him. She wanted this. She wanted him to break. "After Dad what?" I pressed, my voice sharp now. His face twisted, the boy I once cradled replaced by something cold and feral. He wouldn't get out of my way. "Just like you." The room spun, but I held my ground. The truth was out, spoken, undeniable. Jonathan hadn't died from fate. Caleb had confessed. Marissa's smile was thin, cruel. "Now you see, Evelyn. He did what had to be done, and we'll do it again if you force our hand." I staggered back, my legs hitting the edge of the chair. My breath came shallow, but something inside me, something that had been building for days, snapped. "You killed your father," I whispered. "And now you want to kill me." Caleb's hand shot forward, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "Stop saying that." His voice cracked, rage and fear tangled together. I yanked free, my voice rising with a strength I hadn't felt in years. "You are not my son anymore. You are a thief, a liar, a murderer." His face contorted, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. Marissa stepped closer, her presence tightening the circle. "This ends tonight," she said calmly. "One way or another." The lamp flickered above us, the shadows deepening. The air was thick with the scent of food gone cold, the echo of Jonathan's name lingering in the silence. I stood between them, heart pounding, but unbroken. If they wanted a breaking point, they had found it, but not in me. The silence after Caleb's outburst was suffocating. His hand still hovered, where he had gripped my arm, the imprint of his rage burning on my skin. Marissa's eyes glittered in the lamplight, her smile small and sharp. They believed they had me cornered, broken, but they didn't know me. Not really. They had forgotten I'd lived a lifetime watching, listening, waiting. A librarian by trade, yes, but a strategist at heart. I'd kept records of stories, of truths, and tonight I would keep one more. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. When Caleb finally stormed into the hallway to pace, muttering under his breath, I turned to Marissa. "You've planned this well," I said softly, letting my voice tremble just enough. "But you made one mistake." Her brows arched. "And what's that?" I slid a hand into the pocket of my cardigan, feeling the cool edge of the small digital recorder I had tucked there earlier. An old device, one Jonathan had used to record his workshop notes. I had found it while searching the desk after discovering the ledger. I had slipped in new batteries, and just before dinner, I had pressed record. It had been running this entire time. "The mistake," I said, my voice steadying now, "was thinking I wouldn't fight back." Her expression flickered, but before she could reply, Caleb returned, his face red, his voice loud. "She's signing tonight. Or she's not walking out of this house alive." The words hit the air like a hammer. I forced my eyes wide, feigning fear, but inside I clutched those words like a weapon. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why do this to me?" "I'm your mother," Caleb's jaw clenched. "Because you stood in my way, just like he did." Dad thought he could control everything, hide money, keep secrets. I showed him he was wrong. I swallowed hard, the room spinning, but kept my focus on his face. "You killed him." "Yes," Caleb shouted. "Yes, I did. And I'd do it again if it meant finally being free." Marissa touched his arm, her voice low and coaxing. "Careful." But it was too late. The words were spoken, raw, recorded. I backed toward the mantel, heart thundering. My hand brushed against Jonathan's photo, steadying me. "Then you'll live with his ghost, Caleb," I whispered. "Because now the truth is out." He blinked, confusion flickering. Then his eyes darted to my cardigan pocket. "You—" Before he could finish, headlights flared across the curtains. A car pulled into the driveway. Marissa's smile faltered. "Who's that?" Hope surged in my chest. Nora Whitfield, my neighbour, punctual as ever for her evening check-in. She had seen the unusual activity at my house and promised to keep watch. I pressed my hand against the recorder, relief and resolve flooding me. I wasn't trapped anymore. The walls that had caged me all night now echoed with proof. Caleb lunged forward, his face twisted in panic. But for once, I didn't retreat. I held my ground, clutching Jonathan's recorder like a lifeline. Because the truth, his truth, was mine now, and it would save me. The headlights cut across the curtains, and moments later came the knock. Sharp, steady, familiar. Nora Whitfield. I'd never been so grateful for that woman's stubborn punctuality. Marissa stiffened, her hand gripping Caleb's arm. "What do we do?" she hissed. Caleb's eyes darted between me and the door, fury and panic warring on his face. For once, he had no rehearsed smile, no mask to hide behind. Just the raw truth of a man whose lies had collapsed around him. I pressed my palm against my pocket, where the recorder rested, still warm from running all evening. Jonathan's old tool had become my salvation. "Answer it," I told them calmly. "Or I will." Nora's voice carried through the door. "Evelyn? You all right in there?" "Lights have been on all night." I stepped forward before either of them could react. My hands didn't tremble this time. I opened the door to Nora's concerned face, her sharp eyes immediately flicking past me to Caleb and Marissa in the background. "Everything okay?" she asked. "No," I said simply. "Call the police." Behind me, Caleb cursed, but the fight had already drained from him. He knew. The truth was captured. The walls had closed in. Minutes later, red and blue lights filled the street. Detective Adrian Cole arrived with 2 officers, his calm, steady presence cutting through the chaos. He listened to Nora's rushed account, then to mine. When I placed Jonathan's recorder in his hands, he nodded slowly, gravely. The officers led Caleb and Marissa out in handcuffs. Marissa's silence was colder than her words had ever been. Caleb twisted once in the doorway, his eyes locking on mine. There was no plea there, no apology. Only rage. The rage of a man undone not by force, but by the truth he could never bury. When the door closed behind them, the house exhaled. The silence was mine again. The days that followed blurred with statements, paperwork, and the slow unraveling of their schemes. Caleb's debts, the ledger, the confessions, all of it laid bare. The world finally saw what I had glimpsed in flashes for years. But in the quiet moments, when the house settled and the night grew long, my thoughts drifted to Jonathan. His laugh, his steady hands, his belief that truth always waited. He had been right. The truth had waited. And at last, it had risen. Nora stopped by daily, bringing warm meals and sharper advice. "You've got iron in you, Evelyn," she said once, setting a casserole on the counter. "Don't you forget it." And I didn't. Weeks later, I stood in Jonathan's study, the ledger and the recorder tucked safely away. I traced my fingers over the worn wood of his desk, the smell of sawdust still faint in the grain. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I protected what you built. I protected us." The house was quiet, but no longer suffocating. The walls felt like mine again, not a cage, but a home. I wasn't naive enough to think the scars would fade quickly. Betrayal cuts deeper than any blade, especially when it comes from your own blood. But I also knew scars could become reminders, proof of survival. As I closed the study door, sunlight poured through the window, casting long, warm lines across the floor. For the first time in years, the house felt not like a place of ghosts, but of beginnings. And I knew then, I had not just survived. I had reclaimed my life.